So we've spoken about the debate on this show since the debate happened. We live streamed it here. And since then, there has been a number of responses to the debate. And now we are getting a response from RFK Jr. And I was kind of surprised by this. As you guys know, he decided to drop out of some of the states and to co-align with Donald Trump and to work with his campaign. That's why I was surprised when RFK Jr. had negative comments about the debate towards Donald Trump. But I think people should kind of see this as a warning sign. He's trying to warn Donald Trump about some of the mistakes that he made during the debate. But not just that. RFK Jr. is also trying to explain to Donald Trump that apparently he believes that after that debate, Donald Trump has lost independent voters. Ooh, taboo. Let's get into that story.
All right, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. kind enough to join us this day after the big debate. It's always good to have you, Robert. I just wonder, you're a pretty smooth debater in your own right. Were you painting for Donald Trump? A lot of his biggest supporters say that he just didn't bring his A game to the debate last night. Karl Rove saying that the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump was a train wreck for him. Do you agree with that?
I thought, or I just watched the previous segment that you did with Doris Kearns, who I've known for, at least 40 years, and her husband, Dick Goodwin, who's very, very close friends since I was a little boy. And I think I haven't seen a better assessment or a more fairly delivered assessment than the one that she gave. I think that Vice President Harris clearly won the debate in terms of her delivery, her polish, her organization, and her preparation. I think on substance, President Trump wins in terms of his governance, but he didn't tell that story. In fact, the first question was an extraordinary lost opportunity because there's a question, and I think Doris pointed out that she never answered, which is, are Americans better 4 years later? And there's really no argument for saying that they are by all the indicia by which you measure social deterioration. We have doubled the inflation rate. The housing rates have doubled in the last 4 years. There's 15 million more people, Americans living in poverty. We have these enormous suicide rates, enormous overdose rates, and we're in 2 wars, and all of these things can be attributed to the poor leadership from the Biden-Harris team, and that's the argument that he should have been making. But
I agree with him, what he just said there, his assessment there, you guys, that that question that was proposed to Kamala Harris about, are Americans better 4 years later? Well, the answer to that is no. I mean, the biggest complaint from people has been the economy. The biggest domestic complaint from people has been the economy. We're not talking about foreign policy, but the biggest domestic complaint has been the economy. And I've heard it from people from all different political ideologies and different income brackets. So I think that Donald Trump really could have took that and really ran with it. But also, it's important to mention that the moderators, and we talked about this last night, the moderators did not fact check Kamala Harris. They did not push back on her because she didn't answer that question. Are Americans better 4 years later? No, we're not. Financially, no, we're not.
But he got distracted. And I think it's unfortunate because I think he really had an airtight argument for his presidency, but he was not able to make that case to the American public.
He says, and he's commented a couple of times today, that he won the debate, and all the polls show that he won the debate. I haven't seen a single one to show that. What did you think of that reaction?
Well, I have seen those polls. They're not. They're polls that you see on the internet, and a lot of them probably have statistical problems with them.
Right.
But I would suspect that the polling over the next week is going to show, probably a slight drop in his support, particularly among independents, as people migrate, because I think it was the first introduction that Harris had to the American people. She's been very skillfully kind of hidden, and she has not done an interview. And this was really an ideal forum for her because there are these 90-second sound bites, and you don't really go into the next level. And
Pause. I don't know if I would call this Kamala Harris's first introduction to the American people because she ran for president in 2020. So I guess unless you weren't paying attention to the Democrat primary debates during that time, maybe then you had no idea who Kamala Harris was. But I tend to remember there was a lot of buzz around her when she first announced that she was running again. I told you I saw her speak before. So when I saw her in New Hampshire, the line was like wrapped around the block and I'm talking like double times around the block for people to try to get into the church in Portsmouth to see her speak. So her name was definitely out there. And then not only that, but I remember when she announced that she was running in California in 2020, there was a large crowd there, a lot of sorors, and they mentioned that on the news. They said a lot of her AKA sisters are here. And I remember that was like a big deal. So I don't know if I would call this her first introduction to the American people, but I guess if you weren't paying attention during the primary races, then maybe you weren't familiar.
I think that she's very vulnerable in a like a long form interview that she'd do on a podcast or on a program like this. I think this is the ideal forum for her to display, her kind of skills, and I think she did that very well. And I think President Trump did not tell his story, which is a very, very good story about his presidency. And I think that he didn't convey that as well as he could.
It almost kind of seemed like he wasn't trying to do that, though. Like when you're going into that type of debate, like since he had already been president and since Kamala Harris is a part of the current administration, he could have easily listed a number of things that he did that he feels helped the economy or helped the American people, and what the Biden administration did, as an opposite, and how he feels that actually hurt people economically in this country. He could have done that, but it seems like he wasn't really trying to focus on what he did that people actually liked. Like, for example, I don't support Donald Trump, and I didn't support him then either. But one of the things that has been said to me over and over again is that some people said that they felt like he was good for small businesses. I heard that from a number of people. Like, people are like, yeah, the breaks that he gave to us for small businesses has been great. I heard it over and over and over again. And I'm kind of surprised, like, he didn't mention those types of things. I don't know. I don't know, but I agree with RFK there. Like, he could have focused more on the things that he did that he felt made Americans happy, because he knows that obviously the moderators and Kamala Harris are going to focus on the things that he did that made Americans very unhappy, right? So you have to be able to counter that by focusing on what you consider to be your accomplishments.
But just to be clear then, Robert, you are not changing your mind or fearing that you hooked up with the wrong horse here, that you're still supporting him to take the White House?
No, on the issues that I consider important. I mean, look, I was listening to the substance, and on the substance, President Trump wins. On the war, Vice President Harris bragged about the endorsements by John Bolton and by Dick Cheney and 225 neocons who have come out to support Vice President Harris this week. These are the people that gave us the Iraq War. These are the people who have given us the endless forever wars. These are the people who gave us the Patriot Act, the surveillance state, the censorship state. And they're not changing their affiliation to the Democratic Party because they've changed their beliefs and their values. They're changing it because the Democratic Party has dramatically changed. It's become the party of war. The party that I grew up with, the party of Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy, is gone. That was the party of peace. It was the party of civil rights, constitutional rights, free speech, and abhorrence of censorship. It was the party that of the working class, of cops and firefighters, of labor unions.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party today is the opposite. It's the party of war. It's the party of the wealthy. 70% of the wealth now is controlled by the Democrats, 30% of the Republicans. So you've had this inversion, and it is the party of censorship. It's the party of surveillance.
Let me pause here for just a second. That's another thing I do want to mention as well. Why didn't Donald Trump attack Kamala Harris for bragging about getting an endorsement from Dick Cheney? Again, another warmonger, lied the American people into that war, all the people that died because of it. I feel like maybe he could have been afraid, well, I can't go after Dick Cheney because he's a Republican and I'm running on the Republican Party. But I would actually assume that his supporters wanted to move away from that style of politics. They wanted to move away from the warmongering. They wanted to move away from the Dick Cheney, George W. Bush style of Republican politicians. I would argue maybe that's why they were supporting him, right? Some people had said to me when he ran the first time, they said, we voted for politicians over and over again, and that they wanted to vote for Donald Trump because he was a businessman. They said, maybe that's what we need in the White House, is a businessman and not a politician. So it almost seemed like, again, like her flip-flopping on the border, like Kamala Harris has moved to the right on some issues. And I think Donald Trump felt like he couldn't attack that because then he would be attacking the Republican Party, who is also to the right on those issues, or on the right on those issues. But I think the point that he could have made is that this person is whatever they want to be whenever it's popular to be it. That's the point that I would have made, because how do you go from I will ban fracking, when she ran last time, to, oh, no, I would never do that. And how do you become this border hawk all of a sudden when you've been in the administration all this time and you were assigned to the border and you just kind of say, let things go and say, I've never been to the border. We all remember that interview, right? So he could have flipped that in his favor and made the case for the fact that this is not someone that is consistent on the issues. This is someone that is whoever you want them to be as a politician, depending on what is popular at that point in time. She supported Medicare for all because at that point in time, when she ran in 2020, it was a popular issue. So everybody needs to pay attention to that. Like, that's what I would have done. I'm not on that stage, but if it were me, I would have made the case for the fact that she's not really consistent.
Remain for you, Robert, right? Those, regardless of the debate performance, those forces remain. The reason why I want to get back to the debate, if you don't mind, Robert, is that we're used to lots of presidential debates, not all the time. Richard Nixon, after his experience with your uncle, didn't debate in 1968 or in 1972. But when your uncle was debating Richard Nixon, I believe there were 4 debates that year, 3 debates, the last go round, 3 debates before that go round. This might be a one and done deal. What do you think of that?
Oh, well, I've heard 2 things from the Trump people today, and I think that they're, at this point, that they want a second chance at a debate, and that President Trump is confident that he'll do very well the next time around. But I don't know whether the Harris campaign will agree to that. So I don't know what's going to happen. And as you know, Neil, this is the craziest election in history. It's the craziest election that you've ever seen and I've ever seen. It's topsy-turvy. You look back at just a month ago when in the days after the shooting at Butler, President Trump was invincible. And then President Biden pulled ahead. President Biden drops out. President Harris pulls ahead. You have the convention. She doesn't get the bump. President Biden pulled it over the last week. President Trump has pulled ahead again. So this all happened in this very, very accordion time frame. we have 52 days left in this election, and I would not be a person to make predictions about what's going to happen next.
No, I hear you on that. If you heard and read the script, you'd think it was something out of Hollywood. It's real. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., great seeing you.
Okay, so I don't know. RFK Jr. there almost kind of sounds like, and I know someone mentioned it in the chat, but I was going to mention it as well. It almost sounds like he has some type of buyer's remorse. And I'll highlight the person who said this in the chat. Where is it? Oh, not that one. Sorry. I'll find. Oh, here it is. Edward, is Kennedy having buyer's remorse? That's what it almost kind of sounds like in a way, but I don't know. Now, he talked about this also on Piers Morgan's show. So he's going on to multiple shows talking about how he doesn't think that Donald Trump did well, and also that he is losing independent voters. Here was RFK Jr. coming up on Piers Morgan's show.
Sure. Well, joining me now is the former independent presidential candidate, now part of Trump's transition team, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Brilliant to have you back, Robert. How are you?
Piers, thank you for having me.
What did you honestly think about last night's debate? I'll tell you what I honestly thought. I thought Trump lost and Kamala Harris won.
Yeah, I think that Vice President Harris was better prepared and that she was much more polished. I think that she also had the hosts on her side, which I think allowed her to get away with some of the statements on the substantive issues. I mean, for me, Piers, on the substantive issues, I think Trump does better. His delivery is bad, and I think a lot of the things that Frank Luntz just said are accurate. But, you know, the first question, I'll give you an example. The first question, which I think was the most important question of the night, was, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
She didn't answer.
She never answered that.
Yeah.
She never answered it. And the hosts were calling Trump on, you know, and debunking and fact checking him on all of his questions, but they did not discipline her on that. And
let me ask you that, Robert. So why didn't Trump then jump in and say, you haven't answered the question, Kamala, are we better off now than we were before I left office? And it was his failure to jump in and get the answers he wanted or the questions he wanted. I just felt that was weird. He just didn't seem to want to do that.
Well, is part of the reason because the mics were supposed to be muted? Do you guys think that's part of the reason why he did not jump in and do that kind of thing? Because there were sometimes when I noticed, like, it seemed like she was trying to jump in, but you could barely hear her because her mic was muted. So I wonder if that's why they did not do that type of exchange. Because you could notice she tried to do it a couple times too. So I don't know. Maybe that's one of the things about having the mics muted, you know?
Quite sure whether he was told not to or was told to behave himself, whatever it may be. He was very un-Trump-like last night.
Un-Trump-like.
Yeah, you know, he actually, historically, he's been one of the greatest debaters in American history. I mean, he dispatched 16 opponents in a row in 2016, but last night he was not showing that side, and I think he lost a huge opportunity to really showcase his policies. Like Frank said, he was the better president. I mean, we have doubled the inflation, the housing prices have doubled. There's 15 million more Americans in poverty. The suicide rates have gone through the roof. The drug overdoses, all the indicia of social deterioration have increased dramatically after, and then the immigrant problem, which I think he talked about constantly, but I think one well-articulated response on that would have been much more effective than the way that it was done. And then on the issues of war, I think, Vice President Harris was bragging about her endorsements by people like Dick Cheney and John Bolton. These are the neocons. There's 225 neocons who endorsed her in the last week. These are people who are pro-war, pro-censorship, pro-surveillance. These are the people who gave us Patriot Act that gave us the Iraq War. They're not endorsing her because they've changed their mind about anything. They were exiled from both the Republican and Democratic Party. Now they're all back. And that's what I worry most about Vice President Harris as a president, that, you know, we're closer now to nuclear conflict than we've been at any time since 1948. And we're in with these wars, and the Iraq War, which, you know, we should have never gotten into, and she doesn't seem to understand at all. She has an inch of knowledge about it. And, you know, unfortunately, he did not take the opportunity to force her to drill down on that and explain exactly what we're doing there and why we walked away from 2 peace treaties with Putin.
But he also,
you know, let's ask that question.
But he also, Robert, I want to play the clip about Ukraine and then ask you a follow-up on this.
Let me pause for a second. I just wanted to add here as well. Kamala Harris is not strong on foreign policy. Every candidate has their weak spot, and that is her weak spot. So if I were debating Kamala Harris, I would really drive in on the foreign policy part, because I know that's not an area where she's strong. And I feel like that was a missed opportunity from Donald Trump there.
Take a listen.
I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers.
Now, we all want the war to end, but he dodged that question. And he was also asked, that you said, you know, as he repeatedly says, I can solve this in 24 hours. He said last night, I'll get it done in between winning the election and the inauguration. I'll get this sorted. But I still remain completely mystified how Donald Trump will get this sorted without handing Putin a win in terms of allowing him to keep some or all of the territory that he's taken. Is there something I'm missing here? Because I don't see any other way this gets ended quickly.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think it's more difficult than ever. I think it would have been very easy, you know, in April of 2022, Putin signed a peace agreement and began withdrawing his troops, and he left Donbass and Lugansk as part of Ukraine. And President Biden forced Boris Johnson to go over there and make Zelensky tear up that agreement. And then since then, there's been 600,000 Ukrainian kids who have died and 300,000 Russians. Back then, it would have been very easy. The more the Russians commit to this, the more difficult it becomes. And right now, the Russians are devastating the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have lost the war. The Russians are routing them on every front, and you know, it becomes much more difficult.
Was that a duck quacking in the background?
Difficult to end the war in a way that's satisfactory, that leaves Ukraine as a functioning nation the farther we go into it. So I think it's more difficult now than ever, but Putin has, until very recently, he has persistently asked for negotiations, persistently. And in fact, Ukraine passed a law making it illegal to negotiate with him. What kind of, what are we into here that you can't negotiate with your opponent? This is, it's inexplicable. But I think the war can be ended. It has to be ended. It's either going to end with the total defeat of Ukraine, or we can save some part of Ukraine at this point. But the Russians are not going to win and lose this war. From the beginning, It was obvious that the Russians would not lose this war. It was a foolhardy errand by Antony Blinken and the people who are making these very, very bad decisions. The neocons in the White House who are making these decisions. It was a horrendous.
But let me ask you that. Okay.
Let me pause here for a second. So here's the problem that you run into with that particular question, right? If they ask you, do you want Ukraine to win the war? Well, change the framing, because the reality is they're not going to win the war. They can't. So it's a trick question, because if you say, I want the war to end, which is what he said, then they're just kind of like, yeah, but do you want them to win? You know what I mean? So I would say to them, I think you should change the framing of your question. The reality is they can't win this war. They can't. It needs to end, and there needs to be a negotiation on both sides. And so when you ask that question that way, it's tricky, because how do you respond to it without sounding like a jackass to people who don't understand the nuance of this conflict? They're sitting at home and they're like, oh, they don't want Ukraine to win. Oh my God. Next thing you know, people are calling you Putin puppets. So the way that they frame the question, that actually matters. That's important. If you're one of the people that wants the war to end and you just want there to be negotiations because, again, you know Ukraine can't win, Kamala knows Ukraine can't win either. But she's willing to go along with it. That's why she got the endorsement from Dick Cheney. Look her up on Open Secrets now and you'll see all the money that she's taken from weapon contractors. That's why they endorsed her, because they know that she'll keep the wars going. So RFK is correct about that. You know, he's really good on Ukraine, terrible on Israel, terrible on Israel.
But look, you and I have debated Ukraine quite a lot, and I don't really agree with your take on this. But let me ask you the same question Trump dodged. Would you like Ukraine to win, just in principle?
What I want is peace in the region.
Well, everybody wants that. But the question is really,
I don't know what victory means. I mean, by winning, what do you mean by that? Do you mean beating Russia, going into Kirks, which they're now in Russia? Do I think that that's a good idea? Do I think that that was a good strategy?
Well, I would think President Zelensky would categorize. Well, I would say winning would mean that the Russian forces withdraw from the Ukrainian territory that they've invaded. That's what winning would look like.
Do you mean including Crimea? I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Well, I doubt it would include Crimea.
I think
let's park Crimea to one side. But in terms of the invasion in 2022, the land that Putin has taken, I would say that Ukraine and Zelensky would see victory as the Russians having to pull out of that.
Well, you know, they had that deal in April of 2022. That was the deal. Donbass and Lugansk would remain part of Ukraine. And the only thing the Russians wanted was, number one, keep NATO out of Ukraine, which is a valid security demand by the Russians. We would not allow Russian coalitions into Mexico or Cuba. We've already shown that. The other thing they wanted is to make sure that Ukraine ended the civil war against the Russian-speaking and ethnic Russians in Donbass and Lugansk, that they could speak their own language. They would be autonomous region within Ukraine, the same way that Quebec is in Canada. Those were reasonable demands, and I think that was a victory for everybody. But unfortunately, we walked with the Biden administration, including Kamala Harris, who said she met 5 times with President Zelensky, walked away from that deal.
Yep. And that's the reality. I want to play the whole thing, but that is the reality of the situation, is that we could have already had a deal on the table. But again, like I said, the war machine wants that to continue, right? So I just want to make a comparison here, folks. And I hate to take you back, but we're going to go back. What we're going to do right now is go way back. We're going to go way back because I wanted you to see the difference. You saw Donald Trump debate in 2024. I want to take you back to a time when Donald Trump was debating Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I want to do this just to show you the difference. And you tell me if you think there's a difference or not. Listen to this.
One of the biggest challenges facing the next president, because clearly we're facing at this point 2 different kinds of adversaries. There are the independent hacking groups that do it mostly for commercial reasons, to try to steal information that they then can use to make money. But increasingly, we are seeing cyber attacks coming from states, organs of states. The most recent and troubling of these has been Russia. There's no doubt now that Russia has used cyber attacks against all kinds of organizations in our country, and I am deeply concerned about this. I know Donald's very praiseworthy of Vladimir Putin, but Putin is playing a really tough, long game here. And one of the things he's done is to let loose cyber attackers to hack into government files, to hack into personal files, hack into the Democratic National Committee. And we recently have learned that, that this is one of their preferred methods of trying to wreak havoc and collect information. We need to make it very clear, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, or anybody else, the United States has much greater capacity. And we are not going to sit idly by and permit state actors to go after our information, our private sector information or our public sector information. And we're going to have to make it clear that we don't want to use the kinds of tools that we have. We don't want to engage in a different kind of warfare, but we will defend the citizens of this country. And the Russians need to understand that. I think they've been treating it as almost a probing. How far would we go? How much would we do? And that's why I was so shocked when Donald publicly invited Putin to hack into Americans. That is just unacceptable. It's one of the reasons why 50 national security officials who served in Republican in administrations have said that Donald is unfit to be the commander in chief. It's comments like that that really worry people who understand the threats that we face.
Mr. Trump, you have 2 minutes in the same question.
So I just want to say something here before he responds, because I do want you guys to see the difference between how he debated in 2016 versus how he's debating now. But one of the things that I never really understood, at least for this particular debate performance, I don't know why Hillary Clinton chose the outfit that she chose to wear. It was very weird to me. It was a long blazer that went down like towards her knees and the suit pants that matched. And it was that bright red color, right? And so here's the thing. When you have the type of presence that Hillary Clinton has, where you tend to come across, well, I don't want to say come across, when you tend to have, RBF, you want to go with a color that's a little bit more softer and is reassuring to the American people, not a powerful color like red. When you have RBF, you want to go with a color like a blue, like a navy, or a softer, Carolina blue, or a green, something that's calming and soothing to people, because you already are like, you're a bit much. You're a bit much, right? So I didn't understand why she chose that outfit. I felt like it worked against her. I really do. You don't need a loud outfit when you have loud personality, right? So her voice kind of, presents itself, and she's not charismatic. And when you have resting bitch face, you really have to go with a color that makes you appear to be more invitable and engaging to people. So I never understood why she went with that color. And then the earrings and the hairstyle, it just gave me like 1984, like Dynasty vibes. Remember the show Dynasty? It just was not appealing, I think. And people do pay attention to those things. Listen to the way he responded here.
Yeah, behind it?
I do want to say that I was just endorsed, and more are coming next week. It'll be over 200 admirals, many of them are here, admirals and generals endorsed me to lead this country. That just happened, and many more are coming, and I'm very proud of it. In addition, I was just endorsed by ICE. They've never endorsed anybody before on immigration. I was just endorsed by ICE. I was just recently endorsed 16,500 Border Patrol agents. So when Secretary Clinton talks about this, I'll take the admirals and I'll take the generals any day over the political hacks that I see that have led our country so brilliantly over the last 10 years with their knowledge, okay? Because look at the mess that we're in. Look at the mess that we're in. As far as the cyber, I agree to parts of what Secretary Clinton said. We should be better than anybody else, and perhaps we're not. I don't think anybody knows it was Russia that broke into the DNC. She's saying Russia, 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 but maybe it was. It could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay? You don't know who broke in to DNC, but what did we learn with DNC? We learned that Bernie Sanders was taken advantage of by your people, by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Look what happened to her. But Bernie Sanders was taken advantage of. That's what we learned. Now, whether that was Russia, whether that was China, whether it was another country, we don't know. Because the truth is, under President Obama, we've lost control of things that we used to have control over. We came in with the internet. We came up with the internet. And I think Secretary Clinton and myself would agree very much. When you look at what ISIS is doing with the internet, they're beating us at our own game. ISIS. So we have to get very, very tough on cyber and cyber warfare. It is a huge problem. I have a son. He's 10 years old. He has computers. He is so good with these computers. It's unbelievable. The security aspect of cyber is very, very tough, and maybe it's hardly doable. But I will say we are not doing the job we should be doing. But that's true throughout our whole governmental society. We have so many things that we have to do better, Lester, and certainly cyber is one of them.
Secretary Clinton.
So does everybody see the difference? Notice how he performed then compared to how he's performing now. So I think there is a difference in the performance. I don't know. Maybe he might want to go back and watch these debate highlights. Maybe he doesn't want to relive that again. Anyhow, yeah. So RFK Jr. sounded an alarm there to Donald Trump about his performance, and RFK Jr. believes that Donald Trump is now going to lose independence because of his debate performance. Kamala Harris's team has requested another debate with Donald Trump. From what I saw recently, it appears he's not interested, I guess, unless it's on Fox News. So we don't know if there's going to be another debate. So like I said, what you saw, that might be all that you get. So that's that. He said a 400-pound. I forgot about that.